Hello, hello, hello. So good to see you all again for episode 4 of season 6 of Sound Mind. I am Jay Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist, your host, and so happy to see you. So happy to see you. I hope that you have been blessed. And if you're watching this, that means that all has gone well and that we've all been seen. And as the old folks like to say, it's better to be seen versus being viewed. Okay. So, um, I hope that everything has been going well with you all as we go into our season 6, fourth episode. Just want to do a quick recap of what we've done in the past 3 episodes. The first episode we did for season 6 was on the concept of forgiveness. And in the second episode, we did learning to live in an understanding way. And in the last episode, we started to touch on the first part of this series, the flavor of emotional affliction. And in that episode, we discussed some of the preceding dynamics of affliction that comes from an emotional base. Okay. We also talked about the definition of the flavor of emotional affliction. We talked about the first ingredient or first stage, which was adverse negative feelings and experiences that repeatedly occur. And we talked about also the second ingredient, which was resentment. We talked about some examples of resentment and also how and why resentment forms, okay? So we touched on the first 2 ingredients. And so now I want to go into the third and fourth ingredients and then talk about the solutions. Because here at Sound Mind, we don't just want to have conversation. We want to have conversation that leads to conviction, but then also ends up with conversion, okay? So we're not just here to talk, we're also here to walk it out, okay? So with that being said, in the words of the good doctor from my hometown of Los Angeles via Compton, the good Dr. Dre, I hope you're ready for the next episode. So let's go ahead and dive in. So ingredient 3 of the flavor of emotional affliction. This is probably the most powerful ingredient of all 4 because we see a lot of this that occurs in our lives, and particularly with the patient population that I've worked with over my 26-year career, I see this particular ingredient a lot. And a lot of times people don't even know that they have it. And this third ingredient is bitterness. Bitterness is a very, very strong dynamic because bitterness can really tether you to an offense. It can tether you to pain, and it can tether you to the hurt that you've experienced at the hands of someone, either knowingly or unknowingly. So I really, really, really want you to get your pens out, get your paper, shut everything down in the house, wherever you are, and just really be able to take this in because this is the most powerful ingredient as it relates to the flavor of emotional affliction, okay? So let's go ahead and dive in with this third ingredient, bitterness, and kind of break this down and let's deal with this together. The first dynamic regarding the third ingredient, which is bitterness, is how does bitterness happen? Okay? How does bitterness happen? That's the $6 million question. Well, here's the answer to how bitterness happens. Bitterness is basically resentment that's built up over time. I'm gonna say that again. Bitterness is basically resentment that is built up over time. Now, if you didn't get a chance to watch the previous episode, I really strongly encourage you to do that so you'll understand the role and the significance of resentment. And remembering that this model that we're speaking of is a progressive model, meaning that it goes from one stage to the next stage to the next stage. And this is the third stage out of 4, okay? So bitterness is what occurs when resentment that is unaddressed stays unaddressed. That's how we end up with bitterness, okay? And when we looked at bitterness and we got a little bit more aggressive in terms of really wanting to get to the basis of it, now the question is asked, why does bitterness form, okay? And bitterness literally forms. You don't wake up one day bitter. It's literally an ongoing progress, okay? And so what we want to do is look at why bitterness forms. And the reason why bitterness forms is, number one, a lack of understanding. When circumstances and things happen and we can't get clarity, we can't get understanding, then it often becomes a pool for where bitterness can start to grow, okay? So as I said in the previous episode, take into consideration that bitterness is what happens when resentment goes unaddressed, okay? So when there's a lack of understanding, and I want to reach way back to episode 2 when we talked about living in an understanding way. What I gave in that episode were the dynamics that are the characteristics of understanding. And those characteristics of understanding are having sympathy / being sympathetic, which is basically having feeling. And number 2 was awareness, so gaining clarity. And then number 3 was tolerance. And tolerance was defined as when there are behaviors and attitudes that we don't particularly care for, but we basically put up with it without negatively responding to an individual in that case. So that dynamic in and of itself, as far as understanding, is composed of those 3 aspects so that we understand what understanding is. So the first reason why bitterness forms is because we have a lack of understanding, okay? The second reason is we have no resolution or efforts to resolve. One of the reasons why bitterness forms is because we don't want to resolve it and there's no effort to, okay? Sometimes people just get mad and bitter for the sake of being that. And I've seen that in my practice. I've seen that in my personal life where people put energy into just being mad because that's just a place that they like to stay. And what I tend to say clinically is typically when people do that, it's because they want to feel justified in their feelings. And in doing so, they refuse to resolve. And you know that may look 1,000,001 different ways. It may come in the form of, well, I don't want to talk to them. If they call, I'm not going to answer their phone call, or there's nothing that they can ever say to me for the rest of my life, we're done. So all those are demonstrations of what happens when there's no resolution or efforts to resolve, okay? Which ultimately, again, contributes to how bitterness can be formed. But then third is long-standing feelings of misuse, okay? Long-standing feelings of misuse. Whenever a person feels as if they've been mistreated or misused, and that's been permeated and simmering over a long period of time, that's a very, very dark place to be. And when a person goes to that depth, then what ends up happening is they actually end up living there. And that's how bitterness actually becomes to be a part of their everyday life. So those are the answers that I wanted to give you all regarding why bitterness forms. Again, bitterness forms from number 1, a lack of understanding. Number 2, no resolution or efforts to resolve. And then number 3, long-standing feelings of misuse, okay? So we've gone over how bitterness happens and how bitterness is formed, but let's look at how does bitterness grow, okay? Because once bitterness grows, that's a whole different dynamic in and of itself, okay? So it can form, but it doesn't necessarily have to grow. In order for it to grow, it has to be fed. And that's the part that I think is critically misinterpreted when it comes to bitterness. So you can actually have bitterness versus be bitter. And I'll explain that a little bit later on, but I just wanted to put that out there for your understanding.
Deacon King Kong. Very good book. It was one of Oprah's book club selection. And it just takes you on this, Jamie Bride takes you on this wild ride. It starts out just right there. I mean, book opens up with somebody getting shot.
Are we doing spoiler alerts and all that? The money from the church, where was that money? I want to know where the money was.
It's kind of like open-ended. And, I like a good satisfying ending, especially if I read the book or listen to it for 17 hours or something like that.
My Shiro doesn't always wear a cape, but she always has time for a hug, a smile, for going the extra mile. My Shiro stretches every dollar, puts in long hours, puts others first. But now it's your time, Mom. When you're ready to retire, we want you to be able to enjoy it. It's time to start saving now. A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today. Visit aceyourretirement.org/Shiro.
Today, we're talking about caregiving and self-care.
My heart goes out to caregivers. When she was caregiving for her mom, she didn't take care of herself. And unfortunately, a year after I met her, she died because she didn't have the same type of care that she provided her mom and that she showed me how to provide to my father. You have to take care of yourself. You know, I heard someone say that caring for someone who once cared for you is one of the highest honors you can give.
I love that. I think about my parents and they raised me, like you said, and now we help them.
So when we talk about how does bitterness grow, what we're basically saying is in it being fed, it grows because we keep tasting it, okay? Bitterness grows because we keep tasting it. And the reason why I say we keep tasting it is because we will recycle those negative experiences and those negative emotions over and over again. And what that does is, while a person thinks that they're justified in their feelings and their emotions, it also keeps them in that moment. So it's kind of like looping the same song over and over and over again till it becomes the soundtrack of our life, okay? So that is how we keep tasting bitterness, because we keep recycling it. And that means that we're feeding the bitterness. And that is why it's able to grow in the capacity in which it does, okay? Which is why it's important for us to be mindful of what we're feeding ourselves when we feel these feelings, when we're feeling these negative, adverse feelings, when we're feeling resentment. Now, keep in mind, as I said, bitterness is what occurs when resentment isn't addressed. And resentment is what occurs when negative and adverse feelings and experiences aren't addressed. So this is progressive. Nobody just wakes up bitter. It's not how that works. It is a progress. It is a process that occurs. And these are some of the things that I want us to look at and then check ourselves and say, hey, am I bitter, okay? So the last part of bitter that I want to address, as far as the third ingredient of the flavor of emotional affliction, is explaining why there's a difference between having bitterness and being bitter, okay? I want you to really get this. There's a difference between having bitterness and being bitter, okay? Having bitterness is what occurs when you've been hurt, you've been slighted, you feel a certain kind of way. And when you feel a certain kind of way, here's the thing about feelings that I often say in my practice. Feelings are subjective. It's what you feel, it's yours, okay? So when you talk about having bitterness, it's more so of an internal dynamic. So you can have bitterness and it be internal, and it's impacting you internally. But on the other side, what we have with being bitter, here's where the game gets interesting. Because being bitter basically implies that you've gone from having bitterness to now actually projecting bitterness. Okay, you got me? I want to make sure you understand that. When we get to the state that we're being bitter is an actual state of existence. It is how we exist. It is how we see. It is how we function. It is how we rationalize. Everything we do is now coming from this core of bitterness, and hence being bitter. So having bitterness is what happens internally, okay? Being bitter is now when you project that to people. You project it in your comments. It's projected in your views. And it can also be projected in your spiritual life. It can be projected in your prayers. It can. It can. I've seen that happen a lot in my practice when a person can have bitterness and we can work that out. But I must admit, as a 26-year practitioner, it's a lot more challenging to work through a person being bitter, because everything that they see is now filtered through the lens of being bitter. And so those are the things that I really want you to educate yourself on and take these tools and be honest. Be honest with yourself. As I always tell my patient population, your treatment is only as impactful as your truth. If you have some discrepancy in your truth, your treatment's not going to be as effective. So just be honest with yourself, be honest with God, and say, let me check myself to see if I have some bitterness in me. And if I do I have it or am I being bitter? Okay? So I really, really, really want y'all to grasp that, because that's a very, very, very important dichotomy to be able to distinguish as it relates to the flavor of emotional affliction, okay? All right. So we got the third ingredient out the way, so let's go ahead and deal with the fourth ingredient, okay? Now, remember what I said, that there were 4 ingredients, and we've just gone over the first 3. We went over number 1, negative and adverse feelings and experiences that are repeatedly experienced. Number 2, the second ingredient was being resentful or resentment. And number 3, we just went over, which is bitterness, and talked about having bitterness versus being bitter. But this fourth one is what happens when bitterness is not addressed. And the fourth ingredient is harsh treatment, okay? I want you to take a couple seconds to just think about, when you hear the terminology harsh, what comes to mind. Just take a couple seconds to think about that. Take about 5 to 7 seconds and get a concept in your mind of harsh treatment. Okay? So hopefully we got that in our minds about what harsh looks like and harsh treatment, okay? So what we have here, per my definition of what I've seen in my clinical experiences, harsh treatment is something that is unpleasantly rough, cruel, severe, hostile, jarring to the senses through actions, words, and thoughts. Okay? Let me go over that again. Harsh treatment manifests itself through actions, words, and thoughts that are unpleasantly rough, cruel, severe, hostile, and jarring to the senses. Now, I want to deal with that for a few moments, because when you talk about harsh treatment is when we actually are projecting outwardly our feelings of, at this point, bitterness combined with resentment, combined with our feelings of negative experience and adverse situations that occur. So by the time we get to this fourth ingredient, we are just spewing this out everywhere we go. We're treating people harshly, okay? So that harsh treatment can manifest itself in so many different ways. That's why I wanted to add that it was based on actions, words, and thoughts, okay? So because of that, with the circumstances at this point being that it's gone through these 3 previous ingredients and these 3 previous stages, at this point, I want you to think of someone that just always seems mean. Just think of anybody. When I think of individuals in my 47 years on this earth that meet that criteria, I have certain people in mind. Certain teachers growing up, I think we all had that one teacher that just was harsh, okay? And so just think about, when you think about somebody just being excessively mean, okay? Think about that individual and look at harsh and then how they treated you, okay? How that made you feel, how you saw them treat other people. And when I think of individuals in my lifetime that have been candidates for this particular consideration as it relates to harsh treatment, I have memories of people that were unpleasantly rough in the words, you know, how they handled you physically, how they talked to you, how they stared at you. It just had a very hostile feeling to it. The thing about harsh treatment that really stands out to me is when it talks about it's jarring to the senses. You ever had somebody just be so mean and say something so extreme that it just kind of made you kind of jump back a little bit, like that was extreme or that was harsh, okay? It's not just a matter of being mean, it's just mean on steroids. It's mean 2.0. It's not just, you know, sticking the knife in, but literally twisting it and digging some more. It's going for the experience of seeing somebody grovel and hurt to the point that some people may actually feel like there's pleasure in that. And so with harsh treatment, here's the thing that I want us to understand from a progressive regard. Now keep in mind, harsh treatment is the fourth ingredient or the fourth stage of the progression of the flavor of emotional affliction. So when you go back to the first ingredient, harsh treatment is what happens when we don't address the three previous stages. And this is why therapy is so important. This is why processing is so important. This is why prayer is important, because when those things are inside of you and they don't get addressed, let alone if they get co-signed by people, okay? And when I mean co-sign, it's people will justify you talking to people in a mean way. They'll justify your attitude. And if you have people like that in your circle, please check it. Please check it, because you're never going to be free from bitterness if you hang around bitter people. If bitter people are feeding you, then guess what they're feeding you? Bitterness, okay? They're feeding you that. So if this is moving you in any shape, form, or fashion, please check your circle and please check your circumference, okay? Because we want to make certain if we want to work on not being this way, we got to look at the people around us that may be exposing us to what I call cognitive and emotional COVID at this point. Some people will be infected and then they're used to it and show no symptoms, but can pass something on to you. And then you end up, because you have pre-existing conditions, you can end up a lot more sick than they are because of it. So really check your circle and make certain that people around you aren't bitter and practicing bitterness, okay?
One of the things God told me was, and to answer your question about what makes me different, he said, you're going to be authentic. Yes, other coaches will be able to help people, but you're going to be able to do that because of your authenticity of how you went through. And then secondly, what makes me different is I am a prayer warrior. I war for my clients. Yeah. I intercede for my clients. Yes. I pray for my clients.
You've just answered the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of our questions right there.
Part-time job, full-time hustle, all-time Shiro to all of us. You nurture, we listen. You teach, we thrive. You lift our spirits, but we've got to lay down the truth. It's time for you, our Shiro, to stretch for the stars. A free online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today. Start saving more for retirement so you can feel prepared and live your life to the fullest. Visit aceyourretirement.org.
You know, I was one of those Baptist babies born on the pew who remember songs like, so forget about yourself, concentrate on him and worship him. It's hard to give the best if you physically are falling apart. So as a pastor, how do you reconcile that kind of theology with a theology of self-care?
The best gift that I can be to my congregation is to model it. God is concerned about every aspect of who we are. God created our mind. God created our bodies. Why would God create a mind, a body, a spirit, a soul, and tell us not to take care of it?
What we went over was the 4 progressive stages. Keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. This is progressive, meaning one stage leads to another. Now say it with me. Stage 1, negative and adverse feelings and experiences that are repeatedly experienced. When that stage is not addressed, it goes to stage 2. And stage 2 is being resentful or having resentment. If being resentful and having resentment isn't addressed, then we progress to stage 3, which is bitterness. And we spoke of the difference between having bitterness and being bitter. But if bitterness isn't addressed, now we go to the 4th stage, which is harsh treatment. So do an assessment of your circle. look at people in your life, and if you can see certain trends based on this model, you'll be able to see exactly kind of where they are, and it'll help you understand why they became that way. Again, nobody wakes up one day and says, I just want to be bitter. It just happens. It legitimately just happens. So hopefully that'll give us a compassion towards individuals that display these particular dynamics, but it doesn't give them a pass. I believe in lovingly confronting individuals, and I do that in my practice, or what I call therapeutically confronting, based on the behaviors that are being presented, because we want everybody to have a sound mind, which is why we're here. So now that we've gone through the 4 stages or the 4 ingredients of emotional affliction, now the question is, well, how do we fix it? I'm glad you asked, because it's not hard to fix. One of the things that I do in my practice is I practice what I call inverted processing, okay? I'm gonna say that again. I practice what I call inverted processing. And basically what inverted processing is when we go backwards in order to move forward, okay? It's when we go backwards in order to move forward. So with inverted processing, it's a matter of, first of all, establishing what stage a patient may be in or what stage you may be in. And from that moment, let's go backwards. If I realize that I treat people harshly, let me go backwards to when bitterness might have set in. But once I'm able to see where the bitterness might have set in, let me go back a little bit further to where resentment set in. And once I got an understanding of how resentment set in, now let me go back to the negative and adverse experiences that happened repeatedly that never got addressed. So that's going to help me to be able to process each stage and get to a point where I'm at peace with where it all started. And that way, I'm able to unravel this ball of harsh treatment. And then it changes the flavor of affliction, okay? And once we do inverted processing, we go backwards, we're able to find out where it all started. And then at that point, what we do is we go from having to experience the flavor of affliction, and now it becomes the flavor of affirmation, okay? So through therapeutic processing, transparency, honesty, accountability, we can take affliction and we can turn it into affirmation. But we gotta be willing to do the work. Now, let me give you this example before we wrap up for this particular episode. Now, as I was doing the research and capturing my thoughts of the years of dealing with people that either had resentful tendencies or people that had become bitter or harsh treatment, ironically, when I was thinking about the flavor of emotional affliction, it brought to mind one of the strongest muscles in the body, and I'm speaking of the tongue. And it made me want to look a little bit more deeply into the tongue and its functions. And what I discovered is that we all know that our tongue has particular places on it that can register certain taste experiences. And what I realized is that when you're talking about the flavor of something, it's all a matter of perspective, how we look at it, okay? The tongue can experience several different tasting sensations. At the very tip of the tongue is where sweet and salty is experienced. On the side of the tongue is where sour is experienced. In the very middle of the tongue is where there is sweet experience, the sweet by itself. And ironically, bitterness is at the very back of the tongue. So what does that say in terms of the solution? Very easy to comprehend. When you look at resentment, when you look at bitterness, it's often about what you take in, being mindful of what you're eating. What are you eating emotionally? What are you eating relationally? What are you eating socially, through social media? And it's all about where you position what it is that you're taking in. Now keep in mind, on the side of the tongue is where sour can be tasted. So I can take something that could be relatively sweet, but if I move it on that side of the tongue, it's gonna accent the sour that is tasted. If I move it to the front of the tongue, I can taste sweet and sour. But ironically, the sweet spot is dead smack in the center. So what am I saying? With everything that approaches us in life, we want to be centered. The best thing is, when I say centered, be balanced. When situations and circumstances occur, just be balanced. Be fair, take your time, or as I like to say in my practice, and you can use this tool, I believe in praying, processing, then presenting. The 3 Ps: pray, process, present. And the reason why that's so impactful with my population is praying in and of itself is a process and event. It's where we go to God and we can be honest and transparent, and he can take that. Go to God honestly, okay? And then when you go through processing, like with a therapist, like myself, processing gives you another layer to be able to sift through. So between prayer and processing, those are filters that can help you move to a place that you are ready to do the 3rd stage, which is presentation. So if you're upset with someone, if somebody's offended you, pray about it, process it. And I tell my patients all the time, pray and process, pray and process, pray and process, until you get to the point that all of the impurities of the feelings have been filtered out, so that when you present, you come across as sincere, you come across as mature, and you come across as sound, okay? So that's important, and those are the solutions that we can implement to make certain that the flavor of emotional affliction then can become the flavor of emotional affirmation. Because when you realize that you have these feelings and these things you've gone through, and you deal with it and you process it, it's going to affirm a lot of things in you and your ability to be able to apologize to people as needed and to be able to forgive some people and to set yourself free, okay? And that's what we want. We want everyone to be free, and we want everybody to be sound in their mind. So that's it for the flavor of emotional affliction. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it. Thank you so much for your continued support. Y'all are just the absolute best, man, and we love you at Hope TV. I love you as the host of Season 6, and thank you so much again for your support. As always, please, please, please support these other great programs that we have on Hope TV. So many to name, I can't even, list them all, but just go to htvnow.com and you can see the full scheduling of what we do, and go visit us on Facebook, on Instagram. We're doing some great things here, and we want you all to be a part of it, okay? So thank you again for your support, and as always, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he turn his loving smile and countenance towards you, and may he grant thee shalom peace. I am J. Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist, and as we always say at the end, make sure that your theology is sound so that you can have a sound mind. We'll see you next episode. Take care. Be safe. We love you. Bye.
What type of encouragement or something you would tell single people dating?
Social media is not permanent. Social media is artificial. Learn how to be yourself with a person. Be honest
and know your worth. And I will say this: quit valuing yourself like a Rolls Royce, but you showing hoopty mentality. You parading around like a hoopty. The real men, somebody worth something, we not looking to take a hoopty home.